Garrett Hale was used to power, control, and predictability. Nothing in his world ever caught him off guard. Until two identical 6-year-old girls appeared in front of him, their wide blue eyes locking onto his. "Sir, we're lost," one of them said. The other nodded. "And we were looking for you." Garrett froze, his mind racing. Looking for him? Before he could process what was happening, he found himself exhaling sharply. "All right," he muttered. "Let's figure this out." Garrett Hale moved quickly down the sidewalk, his eyes focused ahead as he checked his watch. He was late for a meeting, something that almost never happened. His life was built on discipline and control, and lateness was a weakness he didn't tolerate, especially in himself. His driver was already waiting by the curb, the sleek black car gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Just as he reached for the door handle, a small voice stopped him. "Sir." Garrett turned sharply, frowning. Standing just a few feet away were two little girls, no older than 6. They had identical dark curls framing their small faces, and their striking blue eyes, unmistakably the same shade as his own, stared up at him with a mix of uncertainty and determination. His first instinct was to glance around, searching for a frantic parent or guardian, but the sidewalk was mostly empty. The girls were alone. "Are you lost?" he asked, keeping his voice even. One of them hesitated, biting her lip before shaking her head. The other, who looked slightly more confident, took a step forward. "We were looking for you." Garrett stiffened, his grip on the car door tightening. That was not an answer he had expected. "You were looking for me," he repeated, his voice measured. Both girls nodded at the same time. Garrett felt a strange unease settle in his chest. Children didn't just go searching for corporate CEOs. Something about this wasn't right. "Where are your parents?" he asked. The Boulder twin hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "At home." Garrett narrowed his eyes. "Do they know you're here?" This time, the answer didn't come as quickly. The quieter twin shifted slightly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her small backpack. The slight guilt on her face told him everything he needed to know. "No," she admitted softly. Garrett exhaled slowly, glancing between the two of them. They didn't seem scared, which only added to the strangeness of the situation. If they weren't lost, and if their parents didn't know they were here, then why had they come? "And why exactly were you looking for me?" he asked, crossing his arms. The girls exchanged a glance. The one who had spoken more pulled something out of her backpack and held it out to him. It was an old photograph. Garrett took it, his breath catching in his throat as his gaze fell on the image. It was him. Younger, dressed in a casual button-down shirt, standing beside a woman with soft brown eyes and dark curls. He knew this picture. He knew her. Mallory Carter. A name he hadn't thought about in years. His eyes flicked back to the twins, something cold running down his spine. "She's our mom," the girl said quietly. Garrett's pulse pounded in his ears. He looked down at the photograph again, then back at the two little girls with identical blue eyes. For the first time in years, Garrett Hale had no idea what to say. Garrett stared at the photograph in his hand, his fingers tightening around the worn edges. The image was slightly faded, but there was no mistaking the two people in it, him and Mallory. He hadn't seen her in years, hadn't even thought about her in a long time. Yet here he was, standing on a busy sidewalk, confronted by two little girls who claimed she was their mother. His mind raced through the possibilities, searching for an explanation that made sense. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong person. Maybe this was some kind of elaborate misunderstanding. But as he looked at them again, those wide blue eyes staring up at him with quiet anticipation, he knew deep down that it wasn't a mistake at all. "Where is your mother now?" he asked, his voice controlled, but not as steady as usual. "At home," the Boulder twin said. "She doesn't know we're here." Garrett felt something shift inside him. You ran away. The quieter girl hesitated before nodding. We wanted to find you. His grip on the photo tightened as he processed their words. Mallory hadn't sent them. They had come on their own, which meant she either hadn't told them about him or hadn't expected them to ever meet him. Either way, they had found him, and now he had two 6-year-old girls standing in front of him, expecting something from him that he wasn't sure he could give. You shouldn't have done that, he said, running a hand through his dark curls. He wasn't used to dealing with children, let alone two who had tracked him down like this. Your mother must be worried sick. The first twin, Lily, as he later learned, shifted slightly. We thought she wouldn't notice. Garrett let out a slow breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. He had built his life on structure, control, and calculated decisions. Nothing in his world was ever left to chance. But this? Two little girls showing up out of nowhere with eyes that mirrored his own. This wasn't something he could have planned for. How did you even find me? He finally asked. Sophie, the quieter twin, pulled something else from her backpack, a piece of paper folded several times. She handed it to him, and as he unfolded it, he immediately recognized what it was. A printed copy of his company's address. Garrett frowned. Where did you get this? In a box in Mom's closet, Lily admitted. She had some letters and papers. We saw your name and looked it up. Garrett inhaled deeply, trying to contain the growing frustration inside him. They had gone through Mallory's things, found his name, and somehow managed to make their way here without her knowing. That alone was reckless. But what weighed on him more heavily was the fact that Mallory had clearly kept traces of him in her life, even if she had never reached out. You should have told her where you were going, he said finally. We didn't think you'd be mad, Sophie said, looking at him with a slight frown. We just wanted to know who you were. Her words cut deeper than he expected. Garrett had spent years avoiding connections, avoiding anything that tied him down. He had never considered what might have happened after he and Mallory went their separate ways. He had never once thought that there could be two little girls growing up without knowing who he was. And now they were here. You know now, he said, his voice quieter. What happens next? The girls looked at each other, then back at him. Can we talk to Mom first? Lily asked. Garrett exhaled. That was the only thing that made sense. He couldn't stand here on a sidewalk with two lost children and pretend he knew what to do next. Get in the car, he said, nodding toward his sleek black vehicle. I'm taking you home. As they climbed in, Garrett sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He had come here today expecting a routine business meeting. Instead, he was driving two little girls, his daughters, to a woman he hadn't seen in almost 7 years. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what was waiting for him on the other side of that door. The drive to the girls' home was quiet, but not the kind of comfortable silence Garrett was used to. This silence felt heavy, loaded with questions he wasn't ready to ask and answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Lily and Sophie sat in the back seat, their small bodies barely filling the luxurious leather seats of his car. They weren't scared, which surprised him. If anything, they seemed expectant. As if they had known all along that he would take them home. Garrett's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he turned onto a familiar street. He hadn't been here in years, but everything looked the same. The row of townhouses, the tree-lined sidewalk, the small neighborhood park at the end of the block, it all felt like a place frozen in time. He pulled up to a modest but well-kept house and parked in the driveway. The moment he shut off the engine, the front door burst open. Mallory stood on the porch, her dark brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face pale with worry. The instant she spotted the twins in the back seat, her expression shifted from fear to relief, then to something much sharper, anger. Before Garrett could even step out of the car, she was already moving toward them, her footsteps quick and full of purpose. Lily. Sophie. Her voice was breathless, desperate. What were you thinking? Both girls scrambled out of the car as soon as Garrett unlocked the doors. They ran to their mother, their heads ducked in guilt as she pulled them into a tight hug. "We're sorry, Mom," Sophie mumbled against her shoulder. "We just wanted to see him," Lily added softly. Mallory squeezed them tighter before pulling back, her hands gripping their arms gently but firmly. "You scared me half to death," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't just run off like that." Garrett stood beside his car, watching the scene unfold. He had prepared himself for anger, for accusations, but he hadn't been ready for the raw emotion in Mallory's eyes when she looked at her daughters. Finally, she straightened, her gaze snapping to him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Garrett met her eyes, keeping his voice even. "They came to find me. I brought them home." Mallory exhaled sharply, rubbing her temple. "Of course they did." She turned back to the girls. "Go inside. Now." Lily and Sophie hesitated, casting a glance at Garrett before nodding. They walked toward the house, their heads down, leaving the two adults standing in tense silence. Once the front door closed behind them, Mallory crossed her arms. "So," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Now you know." Garrett nodded slowly. "Yeah. Now I know." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Took you long enough." His jaw clenched. "You never told me, Mallory." Her expression hardened. Would it have made a difference? Garrett didn't have an answer to that. And the fact that he didn't frustrated him more than anything. Mallory sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. "Look, I don't want to do this out here. Come inside." He hesitated for a second before following her up the steps. The inside of the house was warm, lived in. It wasn't big, but it was full of life. Children's drawings pinned to the fridge, a basket of laundry sitting by the couch, a few toys scattered near the stairs. It smelled like cinnamon and something vaguely floral, a scent that was familiar in a way that made something in his chest tighten. Mallory gestured toward the kitchen. "Sit." Garrett pulled out a chair at the small wooden table, watching as she poured herself a cup of coffee before turning to him. "You want one?" she asked. "No." She shrugged, taking a sip before sitting across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Mallory set her cup down and looked him in the eye. "I never planned on you finding out." Garrett exhaled slowly. "Why?" She let out a humorless chuckle. "You're really asking me that?" "Yes, Mallory, I am," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You had to know I would have wanted to know." She stared at him for a long time before answering. "When I found out I was pregnant, I thought about telling you," she admitted. "I really did. But you were already gone, Garrett. You were moving up in the world, making your name. And I knew what would happen if I told you." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You would have felt obligated," she said simply. "Not because you wanted to, but because it was the right thing to do. And I didn't want that. I didn't want you in their life out of duty. I wanted you in their life because you wanted to be there." Garrett clenched his jaw. "That wasn't your decision to make." "Maybe not," Mallory admitted. "But I made it anyway." Silence settled between them again, heavier this time. Garrett glanced toward the living room, where he could hear the faint sound of the girls talking upstairs. His daughters. "I want to be in their lives," he said finally. Mallory studied him carefully. "Why now?" "Because I should have been there from the beginning," he said. "And because they came looking for me. That has to mean something." She looked down at her coffee cup, tracing the rim with her finger. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "They've always wondered about you," she admitted. "I never lied to them. I just, never gave them answers. And I think that only made them more curious. Garrett nodded slowly. Mallory took a deep breath. All right, she said. If you really want to be in their lives, then prove it. His gaze sharpened. How? She gave him a small, tired smile. Show up. It was the simplest challenge, but somehow, it felt like the hardest one. Garrett had spent years showing up for meetings, for business deals, for contracts worth millions. But this? This was different. This time, he wasn't just proving himself to a boardroom. He was proving himself to them. The drive back to his penthouse was quiet, but Garrett's mind was anything but. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he replayed everything Mallory had said. She had kept them from him. His daughters. The anger he had felt in her kitchen still lingered, simmering just below the surface. But beneath it, there was something else. Something deeper. Guilt. Because no matter how much he wanted to be furious with Mallory, he couldn't ignore the truth. She had been right about one thing. Back then, he wouldn't have known what to do. He had been too focused on his career, too obsessed with proving himself in the corporate world. If she had told him, would he have made the right choice? He didn't know. And that uncertainty was worse than the anger. When he finally pulled into the underground parking garage of his building, he let out a slow breath, trying to clear his thoughts. He stepped out of the car and headed straight for the elevator, barely acknowledging the doorman who greeted him. His penthouse was just as he had left it, pristine, silent, untouched. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline in the distance, the twinkling lights of skyscrapers stretching endlessly beyond the glass. It was the kind of view people dreamed of. But right now, it just felt empty. He walked toward the bar and poured himself a glass of whiskey, taking a slow sip as he stared out at the city. His mind drifted back to earlier that evening. The way Lily and Sophie had looked at him when they asked who he was. The way they had clung to Mallory when they realized she was upset. They weren't just two random children. They were his. His daughters. The thought sent a strange, unfamiliar sensation through him. It was different from business, from deals, from anything he had ever handled before. It wasn't something he could strategize his way through. He had spent years making decisions that shaped entire industries, but he had never made a decision as important as this. Could he do this? Would they even want him to? The sharp buzz of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen. Mallory. He hesitated for only a second before answering. Yeah. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. The girls won't stop talking about you. Garrett exhaled, running a hand through his curls. Is that a good thing? Mallory let out a soft laugh, but there was something tired beneath it. I don't know yet. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she sighed. Look. I know today was a lot. For all of us. But if you're serious about being in their lives, I need to know that you're really going to be there. Not just today. Not just when it's convenient. Garrett leaned against the counter, staring at the dark liquid in his glass. I meant what I said, he replied. I want to be there. There was another pause, then a quieter voice. Then prove it. Garrett frowned slightly. How? Come back tomorrow, Mallory said simply. Spend time with them. Get to know them. He inhaled slowly, then nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Okay. Okay, she echoed. Then I'll see you tomorrow. She ended the call before he could say anything else. Garrett set his phone down and took another slow sip of whiskey. For the first time in his life, he was stepping into something he couldn't control. Something uncertain. Something messy. But for some reason, it didn't scare him as much as it should have. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals or profits or power. He was thinking about them. Garrett arrived at Mallory's house the next afternoon, earlier than he had planned. He sat in his car for a few moments, staring at the front door, trying to ignore the unusual weight pressing down on his chest. He had walked into boardrooms filled with ruthless executives, negotiated billion-dollar deals with men who would sell their own families for profit, and yet, nothing had ever made him feel as unprepared as this. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and made his way to the porch. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Lily stood there, blinking up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You're here." Garrett arched an eyebrow. "You sound like you weren't expecting me." She shrugged. "Mom said you would come, but Sophie said you might change your mind." Something about that struck a nerve. "And what did you think?" Lily tilted her head, considering. "I thought if you really wanted to be here, you'd come early." Garrett smirked slightly. "Then I guess I passed the test." Before she could say anything else, Sophie appeared behind her. She stared at him for a moment, then turned her head slightly. "Mom, he's actually here." Mallory's voice drifted in from the kitchen. "Let him in before you keep making announcements, Sophie." The twins stepped aside, and Garrett walked in, feeling the warmth of the house settle around him. The smell of something sweet lingered in the air, like cinnamon and vanilla. The living room was tidy but lived in, filled with small details that made it feel like a home: picture frames on the shelves, a blanket draped over the couch, a few scattered toys near the staircase. It was nothing like the cold, minimalist penthouse he returned to every night. Mallory emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She glanced at the clock before giving him an approving look. "You're early." Garrett shrugged. "Lily said that was the only way to prove I wanted to be here." Mallory smiled faintly, shaking her head. "They're tougher than they look." Lily grinned. "We get it from Mom." Mallory rolled her eyes. "All right, enough ganging up on him. You two go get your coats. We're going out." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "We are." Mallory nodded. "I figured if you're serious about getting to know them, sitting awkwardly in my living room isn't the best way to do it." He couldn't argue with that. A few minutes later, they were in his car, heading toward the park. The girls chattered in the back seat, sometimes to him, sometimes to each other, filling the silence in a way that was surprisingly comfortable. "So, you're rich, right?" Sophie asked suddenly. Garrett glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Something like that." Lily leaned forward slightly. "How rich?" Mallory sighed. "Girls." "What?" Lily said innocently. "It's a fair question." Garrett smirked. "Rich enough." Sophie squinted at him. "Like, rich enough to have a pet tiger?" Garrett chuckled. "Why would I need a tiger?" Lily shrugged. "Because you're a CEO. CEOs do weird things sometimes." Mallory groaned. "Please don't assume every CEO is a lunatic." Sophie crossed her arms. "Then what's the point of being rich if you don't have something cool?" Garrett thought for a moment. "I have a plane." The twins exchanged wide-eyed glances. "You have a plane?" Lily asked. Garrett nodded. "And a helicopter." Sophie's mouth dropped open. "Can we ride in it?" Mallory turned in her seat. "Absolutely not." Garrett smirked. "Maybe someday." The twins whispered excitedly to each other as Mallory shot him a warning glare. He just shrugged, amused by how quickly they had latched onto the idea. At the park, the girls ran ahead, their laughter filling the crisp autumn air. Garrett stood beside Mallory, watching them climb onto the swings. "They like you," she said after a moment. Garrett glanced at her. "Yeah." Mallory nodded. "But they don't trust easily. If you're going to be in their lives, don't make promises you can't keep." Garrett's jaw tightened. I don't break promises. Mallory studied him, as if trying to decide if she could believe that. After a long pause, she nodded. Good. They stood in silence, watching as Sophie leaped off the swing with a triumphant laugh, followed quickly by Lily. For the first time in years, Garrett felt something shift inside him. And for once, he wasn't afraid of it. The days that followed were unlike anything Garrett had experienced before. His usual routine, structured, disciplined, and predictable, had been disrupted by two small forces of nature named Lily and Sophie. Instead of back-to-back meetings and business negotiations, he now found himself answering rapid-fire questions about everything from his favorite food to whether or not he had ever fought a shark. He had expected them to be distant, hesitant around him, but that wasn't how they worked. They were careful at first, studying him the way one might examine something unfamiliar, but once they decided he wasn't going anywhere, they wasted no time in making him part of their world. It was overwhelming. And strangely, he didn't mind. On the fourth day, Mallory called him. He had just finished reviewing a contract when he picked up, leaning back in his office chair. They won't stop asking when you're coming back, she said before he could even greet her. Garrett smirked, glancing at the clock. Miss me already? Mallory snorted. Not me. Them. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. I'll be there in an hour. When he arrived at the house, the front door opened before he could even knock. Lily and Sophie barreled out, their faces lighting up as they grabbed his hands. Mom said we could go get ice cream, Sophie announced. Can we? Lily asked, looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Garrett raised an eyebrow. You do realize it's almost dinner time, right? Lily nodded solemnly. That's why we have to go before Mom changes her mind. Mallory appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. I never agreed to before dinner. Lily and Sophie turned identical pleading gazes on their mother, eyes wide with dramatic innocence. Mallory sighed. Fine. But small portions. The girls cheered as Garrett led them to the car. The drive was filled with endless chatter, with Lily and Sophie debating over what flavors were the best. Chocolate is obviously the best, Lily declared. That's so basic, Sophie argued. Mint chocolate chip is better. Garrett smirked. You know, I'm more of a vanilla guy myself. Both girls gasped in exaggerated horror. Mallory, from the passenger seat, shook her head. And you want to be a part of their lives? Garrett laughed, something that still felt strange coming so naturally. Guess I'll have to work on my taste. At the ice cream shop, the girls wasted no time picking their flavors. As they ate, Sophie suddenly looked up at him, her expression more serious than usual. Are you gonna be here for our birthday? The question caught him off guard. When's your birthday? Next month, Lily said, licking her spoon. Garrett glanced at Mallory, who was watching him carefully. He looked back at the twins. Of course, I'll be here. Sophie studied him for a long moment before nodding. Okay. Garrett wasn't sure why, but that single word felt like more than just an acknowledgement. It felt like a test. One he wasn't going to fail. A week passed, and Garrett found himself slipping into a new rhythm, one that felt completely foreign yet oddly natural at the same time. His life had always been structured, controlled, every moment accounted for. But now, his days were interrupted by excited phone calls from Lily and Sophie, invitations to come over, and the expectation that he would actually show up. And he did. At first, he had assumed the twins would treat him like a guest in their lives, someone new and unfamiliar, but they had no hesitation in pulling him directly into their world. They had opinions about everything, what kind of shoes he should wear, what movies he needed to watch, and even how he should style his hair. He had expected it to be exhausting. Instead, it was grounding. One evening, as he sat in Mallory's kitchen, watching Lily and Sophie attempt to teach him how to braid hair using one of their dolls, he realized something unsettling. He didn't want this to be temporary. He had spent his entire life believing that work was the most important thing, that love and family were distractions, that emotions only made a man weak. But sitting here, with two 6-year-olds laughing at his failed attempt to braid synthetic blonde strands, he couldn't remember why he had ever thought that. Mallory leaned against the counter, watching the scene with an amused expression. "They've got you wrapped around their little fingers." Garrett glanced up, smirking. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophie lifted her head. "He's actually not that bad at braiding." Lily nodded. "Yeah, for a beginner." Mallory shook her head. "They're just being nice. That braid is a disaster." Garrett sighed, setting the doll down. "Fine. I accept defeat." Sophie grinned. "You'll get better with practice." The thought settled into his chest, warm and unfamiliar. After the girls had gone to bed, Garrett stayed behind. Mallory handed him a cup of tea, something she had always done when they were together, back when things were simpler. He held the cup between his hands, studying her carefully. "You're letting me in," he said after a moment. Mallory exhaled, crossing her arms. "I guess I am." "Why?" She hesitated before answering. "Because I see the way they look at you. They like having you around." She glanced toward the hallway where the twins' bedroom was. "And I think they need you." Garrett swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. "And what about you?" Mallory let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I don't know yet." He nodded, setting his cup down. "That's fair." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them no longer as tense as it had been weeks ago. Mallory finally sighed. "You're really staying, aren't you?" Garrett met her gaze. "Yeah. I am." For the first time, she didn't challenge him. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking for an escape. Garrett had never imagined that a single moment could shift the course of his life so completely. He had spent years believing that control and precision were the keys to success, that emotions were liabilities, and that family was a distraction. But now, as he stood in Mallory's kitchen again, helping Lily and Sophie decorate cupcakes for their upcoming birthday, he realized how wrong he had been. The kitchen was filled with laughter and the scent of vanilla. The twins were covered in flour and frosting, their small hands making a mess of the counter as they carefully placed colorful sprinkles on top of the cupcakes. Garrett had tried to help, but after smudging blue icing on Sophie's nose and earning himself a scolding from Lily for ruining the aesthetic, he had been demoted to cleanup duty. "You're taking this very seriously," Garrett said, watching Lily examine a cupcake as if she were judging a 5-star meal. "It has to be perfect," she said, adjusting the sprinkles with a careful hand. "It's our birthday." Sophie licked frosting off her fingers. "I think they look fine." "Fine isn't good enough," Lily muttered. Garrett smirked. "Sounds like someone I know." Mallory, who had been watching from across the kitchen, raised an eyebrow. "Wonder where she gets that from." Lily and Sophie finished their cupcakes and hopped down from their stools, satisfied with their work. "Can we show them to Mom?" Lily asked. Garrett nodded. "Go ahead." The girls ran off, their laughter trailing behind them. As soon as they were out of sight, Mallory turned to Garrett, crossing her arms. "So, birthday presents." Garrett leaned against the counter. "What about them?" Mallory gave him a look. "You're planning on spoiling them, aren't you?" Garrett smirked. "I don't know what you're talking about." Garrett. He sighed, lifting his hands in surrender. "Fine. I may have gone a little overboard." Mallory rolled her eyes. "How overboard?" "Let's just say, there may be a pony involved." She groaned. "You bought them a pony?" Garrett smirked. "Technically, I haven't bought it yet." Mallory covered her face with her hands. I can't believe this. They deserve something special, he said, his voice softer now. Mallory dropped her hands and met his gaze. They don't need grand gestures, Garrett. They need you. He held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. After a long pause, he nodded. I know. Mallory sighed but didn't argue. Instead, she glanced toward the hallway where the girls had disappeared. They really love having you here, you know. Garrett swallowed. I love being here. Mallory hesitated for a moment, then gave him a small smile. Then stay. Garrett didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. Because in his heart, he already knew. He wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. This story is more than just a tale about a billionaire discovering he has children. It's about responsibility, redemption, and the realization that true success isn't measured in wealth but in the relationships we build. Garrett starts as a man who believes he has control over everything, his career, his emotions, his future. But the arrival of Lily and Sophie challenges everything he thought he knew. At first, he struggles, unsure of how to fit into their world. Yet, as the story unfolds, he realizes that being a father isn't about grand gestures or financial security, it's about showing up. Lily and Sophie, despite their young age, are not just passive characters in his transformation. They are the ones who push him to grow, who demand honesty and presence. Their innocence and curiosity force Garrett to confront the choices he's made and the life he's been avoiding. Mallory, too, represents a crucial part of his journey. She isn't just the mother of his children, she is a reminder of who he used to be and a challenge to who he can become. Her reluctance to let him back into their lives isn't about resentment, it's about protecting the daughters she raised alone. The beauty of the ending isn't in perfection but in progress. Garrett doesn't suddenly become the perfect father overnight, nor does Mallory immediately trust him. But what makes the ending powerful is that he chooses to stay. He chooses to show up, day after day, proving not just to Mallory and the girls, but to himself, that he wants to be part of this family. The final moment, where he realizes he's not just someone passing through their lives but someone who belongs there, is what makes the story truly meaningful. Because, in the end, Garrett Hale doesn't just gain daughters, he gains a reason to live beyond his empire.